Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hear the Cannons. I am your host, Colin Hallboom, writer and NFL draft analyst for BucsGameday, which is Sports Illustrated's only website dedicated specifically to covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I am joined this evening by River Wells, editor at BucsGameday, puts out a lot of content himself as well. We're going to get River's take on what's been going down at Bucs Minicamp this week. Lots of storylines are popping up. So we're gonna get to hear from someone who has been on the ground, who has seen it firsthand, some valuable insight coming there. First off, though, I have to say, if you're able, please make sure you are liking, commenting, subscribing, and turning on the notifications to our YouTube channel. Helps us out a great deal so we can keep pushing out such great content. Follow us on Twitter at BucsGameday. And while you're at it, why don't you give River and myself a follow? If you're watching on YouTube, you see he can be followed at River H. Wells. And I am at SI_Buccaneers. Without further ado, River, I'm going to get right into it. We're going to save the pleasantries.
Go for it.
Yeah. Randy Gregory. There's a lot of talk about Randy Gregory this offseason. The Bucs, obviously, they used most of their resources or asset management approach to retaining some key free agents, which I think most Bucs fans were happy with. But in terms of bringing guys to the team from outside free agents, aside from Jordan Whitehead, Randy Gregory was one of the more talked about moves just because, he's a former high draft pick. He's still got all the tools and he's a vet. And I think more importantly than anything else, he adds to a room at the defensive end position that the Bucs desperately needed some juice. So he hasn't been anywhere to be seen. So he's not on the field with his teammates. He wasn't at voluntary OTAs, and he's now absent from mandatory minicamp. Head coach Todd Bowles called it an unexcused absence, and he said quite sternly, "I'll coach the guys who are here." Do you have any insight, River, as to where Randy Gregory is, and what's the vibe around the team? Is it as mysterious as it seems from those of us watching from the outside?
I do not know where Randy Gregory is at the moment, but it's interesting you mentioned that last part because we talked to Levante David today in practice, and he was asked because Levante, Nebraska guy, I believe Randy Gregory is a Nebraska guy too, right? So they talked about, he was asked, have you talked to him? Do you know what's up? And he said no, but he mentioned that Randy's got some personal issues, and despite that, when he's out in the field and he's got a real passion for football and love the game. And so I think there's a lot of players that are, know him and know his epic. Again, he worked really well for the 49ers last year, and then for the Broncos briefly. Didn't get a lot of sacks, but he still was a producer off the edge. So I think the biggest problem with Randy Gregory is that he wasn't at OTAs, right? And then you get to mandatory minicamp, and he's still not there. And as much as I understand the plight of, he's got a lawsuit going on in the NFL right now. He's got personal issues or, stuff that he needs to take care of. I totally get that. But at the same time, you're trying to learn a new offense or defense, right? You're trying to learn the playbook, and you're trying to get in game shape and be conditioned. And we talked to Sterling Shepard yesterday, and he mentioned how when he got into the Florida Heat, it's tough. He said I was running routes and preparing, but I wasn't as prepared as I thought I was. So, he's still getting into shape before training camp. And I think it's valuable for a veteran like Gregory. And the fact that he's not here hurts, I think, a little bit for his development and his time at the Bucs. And so we'll see where it goes. I don't know. He doesn't show up tomorrow. I don't know what the vibe is there or how they're going to deal with that, but it will be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think if Todd Bowles had approached it a little differently, maybe Bucs fans would kind of chill out a little bit, but it just appeared as though he wasn't too pleased with the absence. Of course, hopefully everything is good with Randy Gregory and it's nothing too serious. I think that goes without saying, but you're certainly right. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's important for him to be on the field with his new teammates in his new home state and all that stuff that you mentioned. You also mentioned Sterling Shepard, and we haven't had the chance to talk about it here the Cannons quite yet. So now's a great opportunity. He's been on the field at minicamp. Baker Mayfield during his press conference today had some comments, and he was, he talked about, or he confirmed what had already been mentioned in the media, which was that Baker, he vouched for his former Oklahoma teammate to the Buccaneers front office. Didn't necessarily expect them to bring him in for a tryout the next day, but he said Sterling took care of that. He said he did the rest. And he sees a lot of similarities from his own situation. Just if we, go back 12 months, I mean, Baker was in many ways written off. He dealt with some injuries and all that. We all know that story, but he sees a lot of parallels there. And Baker went on to say about Sterling Shepard, he works his tail off, brings a little juice from the mental side of things. I'm curious, first off, what are your thoughts on this signing before you saw anything? And then what have you seen from him getting out on the field with his new teammates? Seems pretty eager from my vantage point.
Well, I'm generally a fan of those, low risk, possible, good, big reward signings. And I think Sterling Shepard is certainly one of those. He's being paid on a veteran salary benefit contract, which does not cost the team very much at all. So I don't even think there's a lot of pressure for him to, make a team or do this or that. It's great to have a guy that Baker Mayfield knows and is comfortable with from his days in Oklahoma. So, I mean, worst case scenario, he gets cut. Best case scenario, Baker's got a guy that he can trust. And another veteran, any veteran leadership coming into this room. I mean, obviously, you got guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin who are definitely vets. But outside of that, Rakim Jarrett, Trey Palmer, Jalen McMillan, very young squad at wide receiver. So I like that presence there for sure. He hasn't been doing too much in training minicamp so far. He's definitely been working. He's getting back up to game speed and getting back up to conditioning. Obviously, he had a route that he ran today, a crosser, and it was thrown to a really tight window with him in the corners, so it was incomplete. And that's the only real sort of action I noticed on the day that he was participating in. He's lined up in the slot I saw yesterday. So he's getting back into game shape, and he's already, I saw him doing drills with Chris Godwin at the beginning of the day. So he's getting to know the receiving room, and I don't think there's necessarily a downside to it, as much as, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But the possibilities that, Baker can have a comfortable guy that he knows that the receiving room can learn from, I think that's fine. I like that.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the young depth that's starting to accumulate on this roster at that same position, wide receiver. During his media availability today, Baker also spoke quite highly of Jalen McMillan. He kind of dug into specifically some of the things that have impressed him about the rookie wideout out of Washington. He said, really friendly at the top of his routes, attacks the ball, catches with his hands, explosive, smooth route runner. Have you seen those same things? I know you did earlier during the rookie minicamp, but is he still making an impression? You wrote about some observations you had, and I believe, not to spoil the lead, this may have been one of them.
Yes, I am still impressed with Jalen McMillan. He, obviously in shorts and in shirts, it's hard to tell exactly who does what or quite yet, but he's a really smooth route runner. He's got really sure hands. He's made some great catches so far, even from rookie minicamp up to here. He had a nice diving catch, I believe. It was either the last OTAs we saw or the first rookie minicamp. He had a really nice sort of leaping catch. And today he went 3 for 3 on passes on his way. He had a really nice catch on the sideline from Baker Mayfield to start the day off. So I'm pretty impressed with him. Obviously, we'll see how it goes when people are in pads and he gets more reps with some more of the first team. And yeah, he's been with the first team a little bit, but he's going in and out and doing a lot of things. So I'm been a pretty big fan of him. I think it's definitely easy to see how he was able to do so well in college, especially with Michael Penix, and I think he's been pretty good pretty much the entire way through. So exciting to watch.
Yeah, and Caleb from Tampa asks a great question. He says, "Where do you see him fitting in with the wide receiver group?" Caleb Skinner, friend of the show, let's call him.
Yeah, friend of the show.
It's a good question, though. It really is.
Very good question, actually. Yeah.
Just like positionally, right? The whole Chris Godwin debacle, like moving Chris Godwin back to the slot, and then you've got a lot of really smart football people who believe that Jalen McMillan is like a slot only receiver. So, people are like, "Oh, Jalen McMillan, he's balling out. Feels like he's going to be wide receiver 3 in Tampa." Well, if that's the case,
it's an outside guy.
Yeah, how is that going to work? Because has he been lining up primarily in the slot? Is it mostly shell stuff, or what are you seeing there in terms of the positional usage between him and Godwin?
Yeah, they're definitely moving him around. I've seen him in the slot, and I've seen him outside. And it's just like you said, if you've got Godwin going back to the slot, which Liam Cohen seems to be stressing that that's what's going to happen, which is good because Godwin's fantastic in the slot. That leaves Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan as, wide receiver 3. And we know that Palmer is a deep threat, kind of speedy streak, kind of wide receiver. So he fits that archetype well on the outside. But then McMillan looks very smooth right out the gate. He looks very polished, very good route running, good hands. So he's got a case for that as well. So I think as we get closer to the beginning of the season, as we get in training camp, and as we see some more reps being taken, the pads get, coming on, that's going to be a pretty interesting thing to watch because I liked what I saw from Trey Palmer last year. He definitely needed some work out the gate. He wasn't super polished, and he made his fair share of mistakes. But that being said, he has a lot of really good speed. I've seen him make some great catches. That breakaway speed that he showed in the Eagles wildcard game, that was a great play. So I think there's a lot to develop there, but it's going to be hard to develop him if Jalen McMillan is cutting into the snaps, and probably vice versa. So really interested to see where he fits in. And right now, he's been impressing, certainly, in camp. And I mean, we're impressed with him. Baker Mayfield's impressed with him. Todd Bowles is impressed with him. So definitely be fun to see where that goes.
Yeah, Trey Palmer did make his fair share of mistakes. He made his fair share of splash plays too, as you alluded to. So
yes,
it's a good problem to have, I guess. The positional thing, though, I'm really looking forward to some clarity there in terms of how that can all work. Because if McMillan's got that pop to be a wide receiver 3, how's it gonna work? Can't have 2 slot guys out there.
Right.
Talking about, I want to shift back to some of the incoming free agents. Bryce Hall, you mentioned something about Bryce Hall, and I think it ties into the Jalen McMillan thing because Jalen McMillan is making that vet look like a vet. Like, I don't know how you describe that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you saw in terms of those two matching up together, and do you have any concerns?
Bryce Hall had a bit of a tough time today on Wednesday. Whether or not that's from the acclimation to the playbook, to the heat, it could be any number of things. And again, to quote the very famous Allen Iverson quote, we are talking about practice. But Jalen McMillan did have a really nice route run for the first play of 11v11s to the outside, left side of the field, and he got Hall on that one. And then Baker Mayfield hit Rakim Jarrett on a streak, quote unquote deep ball, about like halfway up, maybe even further than halfway up the field. But it was a medium to deepish streak, and Rakim Jarrett got him by quite a bit. And then there was a third play where Rakim had him for about a step and a half, and the ball was slightly overthrown, so they didn't get completed. But it seems like he's been, lagging behind a little bit from some of these receivers. So that'll be something he wants to improve on tomorrow for sure, and then going into training camp. And again, whether or not that's because A or B or C, I'm not sure, but it was definitely noticeable. He was getting a little bit picked on in practice today.
Love the Allen Iverson reference, by the way, as a closet hoop head myself. Big fan of that. It's not just practice we're talking about, though. It's padless practice.
It is. So even lower than practice.
Right? Yeah. Let's stick on the theme of these incoming free agents because I'm super interested in this left guard situation. I thought I was I had my detective hat on earlier in the off season, and I was picking apart quotes from the O-line coach Carberry and from Liam Cohen, and I was like, oh man, it's clear. Like Sua Opeta's the guy. They think this guy's a starter. They've said as much. Yeah. And then obviously everyone ran with that because you take a word for what it's worth. But apparently Ben Bredesen has been getting more work there with the ones. Is that true? And what do you think of that? And why? Is that going to continue? Give us your opinion.
That is true. That is true. I believe on the first day that media was allowed to go to OTAs, it was Opeta. And then ever since then, it's been Bredesen. So he had the last 2 OTAs, and then he was the first line yesterday and today, which is interesting because Bredesen has not graded very highly among many, experts, pundits, etc. when it comes to his line play. Struggled a little bit in New York last year. And Opeta came from a Philadelphia Eagles line that was quite good, still is quite good. Top 5, if not 3. But he didn't play as much on that line because obviously there's a lot of great guys over there. So if they like Bredesen, they like Bredesen. And again, we just mentioned it. It's padless practice, and a lot of the O-line work and how they're able to perform and prepare involves them hitting people. So whether or not that tune changes once the pads come on in training camp is one thing. But right now, it seems like they're really trusting Bredesen to be on the first line, that left guard spot. And, curious to see if they have Opeta out there tomorrow, but the way that the trend's been going, I would be surprised. So we'll see.
And, whether it's Opeta, whether it's Bredesen, to those players, right, you have the Buccaneers 2024 first round selection, Graham Barton.
Absolutely.
How is he adjusting to playing with the ones? We heard him talking about that Tampa Heat. Is he bringing the heat without pads? I know it's, again, we're talking, but how's he moving out there? Are you seeing the athleticism? Is it tough to evaluate? Tell the people what they want to hear, River.
That's a good one, Colin. Actually, I like that. That's some A1 wordplay. Yeah, he's playing with the ones, and the thing that I've heard from a lot of different people, like Baker Mayfield, Todd Bowles, this is a pretty smart guy. And when you hear him talk, you can kind of tell. Baker joked that Duke's got a good education program over there, but he's a quick learner, and of course, very physical. Plays the game very physical. Hard to show that right now. But you can tell he's got a lot of really good speed off the line. He's really tough. So it's been, it's the start of OTAs and rookie, it was Hainsey. And then now he's getting cycled into playing with the ones. And he's been there quite a bit, especially today. We saw him out there quite a bit with the ones. So he's definitely being prepped to be the starter on this team. I think that's understood. And a lot of people are excited about what he can do, what he can bring. We talked to Vita Vea, said he was a good center. A lot of defensive guys have been pretty impressed with him too, going up against him. So a lot of good stuff. Again, can't stress it enough. When the pads come on, that'll be a good tell. But you can tell some things early, and I think one of the things that we've definitely seen is that Barton's a quick learner. He can pick up this playbook pretty quick. So that's what's happening.
For sure. And it's especially, we have to, be remiss if you don't bring up the pads thing, especially when we're talking about guys along the offensive or the defensive line. I do think there's value, and we're talking skill position players and quarterbacks and all that, right? You can still evaluate the primary skills that they are paid so much money to play, right. Running, catching, throwing, etc.
If you're Dan Campbell, you can just hit and get fined for it. So
yeah. In the least surprising finds, Dan Campbell's team was applying physical contact a couple months too early. Yeah,
a true New Orleans Saints disciple.
Yeah, that's right. Well played. What about the other rookie, Chris Braswell? Man, he signed his contract, so that's great. I mean, not like
it is.
Wasn't expected.
He's contractually obligated to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's good.
Correct. I'm hearing rumblings from that he's looking pretty good and he's impressing some people. We had Logan Hall on last week on the show here, right on. So again, that's why you should subscribe to the BucsGameday YouTube channel and make sure you turn on notifications and all that stuff. But Logan Hall was on last week, and I asked him what his impressions were of Braswell, and he gave me like the strongest take I've heard. And he was just like, that dude's different. Like he's different. And I asked him, what do you mean? And I think he's talking about his athleticism. Like he's seeing things without pads that have caught his attention. So I'm curious if those sorts of observations ring true with what you've seen or heard from people who've been down on the field with Braswell these early stages of his first NFL offseason.
Yeah, I mean, when they do 11 on 11s, I believe it was yesterday he had 2 quote unquote sacks, which is, you run to the backfield and you kind of, But you can tell definitely he's very explosive. He's very quick. And you can tell also when you're watching him do drills, with the stand-up dummies, moving in and out. He's got good bend. He's very explosive. And that's kind of what this unit needed, this defensive or this edge rushing unit, because, Diaby played very well last year. But other guys like Tron Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, a lot of the rotational players, there's got to be an extra oomph to that defensive edge rush, and Braswell could bring that. he looks pretty solid so far. So definitely one of the standouts I've seen in camp. And if he can keep it going, and when he gets pads on, if he can keep that explosiveness and win his matchups, then Tampa Bay's edge rush could exponentially get better. With you have that on one side and Diaby on the other. Those are two. If Braswell pans out, those are two killers on either side. So that would work.
Braswell is one of those guys based on his limited snaps playing for the biggest Power 5 school there is in football, like
right.
at Alabama. I mean,
Yeah.
he is one of those guys who could potentially just really take off when he gets to the NFL. He's gotten all the high-end training and competition and practice. Like maybe he just needs that shot. Maybe Randy Gregory is giving it to him by not showing up. Like maybe that's going to get him on the field. Who knows where this is going to go. So really interesting, kind of like a sleeper, like league wide, really, in terms of a guy who could come in and make an immediate impact. Like how the Rams got a couple mid-round picks who really changed the dynamic of their defensive line last season.
The Rams are frustratingly good at drafting players.
For sure. Yeah. And then they doubled up on those Seminoles this year. Right. So, but we don't need to talk about the Rams too much.
Or the Seminoles. Yeah.
Or oh man, you put me in a tough spot because half our listeners are either Gators or Seminole fans. You put me in the hot seat because I don't know how to respond to that, dude. But I'm just gonna
for those unaware, I did attend the University of Florida, so but we'll talk about that for another day.
Okay, so what is going on? Is this a myth that needs to be corrected, or is it true that Jordan Whitehead, safety, hard hitting, thumping Jordan Whitehead, Buccaneer fan favorite, is returning kicks?
It's true, I tell you. Hear ye. I'm curious to know if this is because Trey Palmer is hurt and has not participated in the last two entering minicamps, or if with the new kickoff rules they are trying out a few new players and seeing how they react to the whole thing. So, but yes, Jordan Whitehead was in fact returning kicks and special teams drills to start the practice off, which is fun to see when you have all these receivers come up, guys like McMillan, Ryan Miller's in there, and then, Jordan Whitehead, the number 3, is coming up in the running back kick. So curious to see if it was really more of like a personnel thing, or if they're like, hey, new kickoff rules, why don't we just, this is a guy's a hard hitter. Let's see if he can hit the other direction. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Maybe they're hoping they can break someone's collarbone or something instead of worrying about how many yards they're going to get on the kick returns, because that's why I would throw Whitehead in there. He'd be hunting out contacts, no question.
Hard hitter.
No doubt. So I don't know if you saw this. Pete Prisco, who's a senior columnist for CBS, he offered a tweet today that caught my eye, and I'm going to read it verbatim for our viewers and listeners because it's quite complimentary. He said, "Watch the Bucs practice this week at minicamp, and a lot of people are sleeping on that team. They will win the division again, much bigger and tougher on the offensive line, and Baker Mayfield is settled in at quarterback. The players love him, from what I am told." So, all comes back to Baker. It's going to be a huge year for Baker. But boy, does he first off say the right things, because the way he handles himself in the media, and I've said this before, it's just a different level of maturity. And you could see that from the second he signed in Tampa. But he has continued it, right? He showed it with his actions. He put those words into action, put together the best season of his career by really every measure. And then here he is again, got his big contract, but he seems as motivated as ever. That chip on his shoulder is still there. And, national observers who are checking out various training camps, not just the Bucs, are coming away being genuinely impressed by the team that Baker Mayfield is leading and how they look so early in the offseason. I mean, that's got to be promising for Bucs fans, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah. I'm kind of fascinated by this whole team, honestly. And the reason being, when I was with BucsWire the other day, I will firmly put my hand up. I had him at 6 wins at the beginning of the 2023 season. They won 9, and then they won a playoff game, and then hung with one of the better teams in the NFL. So now I like the number 10, looking at their schedule, and it leads me to think, man, how much does this team, really improve? We've got we got people who say, oh, they just brought back the same guys that went 9-8 last year. And I think that's a valid criticism. At the same time, through the draft, you've added players to key holes that you're trying to address. So why wouldn't the team look better, right? And I agree that a lot of this hinges on Baker Mayfield, his ability to either replicate his success from last year or go beyond that. If he does that, then I think, when it comes to the division, the Saints, I'm very low on the Saints this year. I'm very low on the Panthers this year. The Falcons are probably going to be a decent problem, but if this Tampa team shows up, then, why can't they? And I think there's some validity both to this team's brought back a lot of people. They went 9-8 last year. Why should we be excited about that? But also, you got a lot of people who are underrating them after the stretch they went last year because they played some really good football towards the end of last year, and they can keep that going. Then they can play with anybody. So I think it makes sense. I think they tried to plug in the holes they need to plug in as best they could, and I am curious to see just how it all comes together, especially with some unknown variables, some players like Baker who people think might regress. Halfway through the season last year, we thought, people wanted Todd Bowles fired due to some poor coaching, and he turned it around at the end of the season, but he's still there, right? So how good do you feel about Todd Bowles going into this season again? A lot of variables, but a lot of potential. And I think that's exciting, and I think that kind of is mirrored in how Pete kind of phrased that tweet. So.
Yeah, and you're right. You bring up a good point about Todd Bowles. Is like let's not forget he's going to be a hot topic at some point this year. I mean, most NFL head coaches are for any team that doesn't come out of the gate flying. And I think Bowles has proven. I like his whole track record of calling a defense. I'm very happy with. Look back at the Super Bowl, especially. Like, he was masterful. Huge reason why they won the Super Bowl. So I have no qualms with how he runs his defense. My issues with Bowles are how he manages his timeouts and his bigger picture decision making, being overly conservative, right? Always trying to trust the defense. Whereas you want to coach, I don't care how pound your chest, stand on a table, defense first you are. You need to show faith in your offense as well. And depending on what your team's strengths are, you need to customize your philosophies on a game-to-game basis based on your team's strengths, just like a GM needs to do the same. So we'll see what happens with Bowles. Now, talking about, this all coming from the Pete Prisco tweet, and Caleb's making some good observations about the NFC South. I'm with you on the Saints. I'm with you on the Panthers. The Falcons will be a problem.
The Falcons, yes.
They will. But I tell you one thing, I'm pretty happy they used that 8th pick on a quarterback who's not going to play for several seasons over the best edge rusher in the draft, Leatu Latu, or whatever edge rusher they choose. Because that's a huge, like they need help there, right? They need help there. So anytime they make. Go ahead. Yeah.
You want to hear a draft story real quick?
Yeah, please. I always got time for that.
I was in Detroit for the draft. I was sitting next to a girl who one of her jobs was with marketing in the NFL. So she had basically a lot of draft feeds up on her computer, and she was eyeing out for certain brands, yada yada, draft parties. And she turned to me during the 8th pick, and she said, "Hey, Michael Penix is getting a phone call right now." And my first thought was, "Oh, someone must have traded up to draft Michael Penix, right? Like, right. I wonder who it was."
Yeah.
And the notification hit my phone that the Falcons had drafted Michael Penix, and you could hear it through the room into the soul, like like a wave.
Yeah.
And I still don't understand it. I've heard arguments from people who have tried to compartmentalize it, and I just don't quite get it. And you're totally right. To get Kirk Cousins and to have and they have a really good roster over there, to improve it with an edge rusher or with defensive piece or another weapon could have been huge for them, and they did not do that. And with how this Bucs team has won the NFC South for 3 years in a row, and how well they've played against their division opponents, that could bite them bad. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, long time between now and then, but they've also got to adjust to a lot of new faces and key roles, primarily the quarterback, and
right.
He may be an
Raheem Morris. A lot of people got to factor in Raheem Morris.
Well,
right?
we're all very familiar with Raheem Morris. Yeah,
and he was young then.
Yeah.
But the question remains: to people saying that this is going to be a team that gets deep into the playoffs, this Falcons team, they're going to win the division. Raheem Morris is a part of that equation. Has he become a lot better of a head coach since the time he left Tampa Bay? Has he what's it going to be like? He's a first year head coach after years and years and years and years of not doing it. In Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see how he coaches this team and how they react, and that's going to be a big factor too. That I think a lot of people are kind of not taking into consideration as much when they talk about the Falcons this year. So.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say, though, if we're talking Raheem Morris, is like hard to envision him misusing or not using weapons like Arthur Smith did last year.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
From a Bucs perspective, you would have liked to see him there, keeping Bijan's legs fresh and keeping Kyle Pitts' hands warm by not giving him the ball to do what they do best. Yeah, so I'm a little scared that Raheem Morris is a smart enough guy to know that he's going to try to get the ball in those playmakers' hands. And I'm also a big Drake London guy, so there's no question Kirk's got the weapons and they got pieces on D2. But we'll have a lot more time to dissect the Atlanta Falcons and their roster and the intricacies of this intriguing NFC South division as the offseason churns along. So I think on that note, River, I want to say first off, thank you, because I greatly appreciate your insight, giving us some boots on the ground perspective of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and, quite a few storylines, quite a few things going on at minicamp this point of the offseason. So I know Bucs fans appreciate to hear that information. As mentioned off the top, you can see it on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. You can follow River Wells on Twitter at River H. Wells. Editor for BucsGameday, once again, which is Sports Illustrated's only website dedicated to specifically to covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We got you covered all year round. Please make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Help us grow there so we can keep bringing on Buccaneers and coaches, and like we've already got a pretty strong track record of doing that, and we've only been rolling for a little bit now. So come join the party. Make sure you are a regular, and we'll take care of the rest. On that note, I am Colin Hallboom. You can find me on Twitter at SI_Buccaneers. We'll see you next week. Till then, go Bucs. Be well.